Welcome to Behind the Sims. At SaberSim, we're a team of professional gamblers, data scientists, and sports nerds building the best DFS optimizer and sports betting model on the market. This podcast is a behind-the-scenes look at how we do it. Every episode is an unedited recording of our team's actual conversations as we research, analyze, and iterate our way to answering the tough questions in DFS and sports betting. Whether we're answering questions like what's the best way to build your bankroll, analyzing different ways to diversify, or even building new models, we're going to share it all right here, and we aren't holding anything back. If you're ready to go deep into what it really takes to win, then this is a podcast for you.
All right. Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to another Behind the Sims episode here. We are continuing our work on the slider backtesting project, getting pretty close to the finish line there. Started to have some of those initial findings coming through last week, and then kind of wanted to reorganize some of the data there to make that make a little bit more intuitive sense. So, Matt, I guess I'll go ahead and just hand it straight over to you to give us a little bit of an update on where we're at now, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, sure. Honestly, we haven't run. One thing I think I might have mentioned is that we wanted to run some more slates or more sims. We haven't done that yet, but I chatted with Elijah a bit this week, and we kind of just went over some of the data, and just I wanted to look at some things in a little bit of a different way. I think one was just, one concern we had is the variance in kind of if we just look at one, the results of the top build per contest, then we maybe are getting a little bit too much noise in the data. But if we're looking at the top 10%, then or top 20, I can't remember what we had. I think maybe you had top 20% last time.
Yeah.
It's too much smoothing of the data, and that's too many builds to look at. And so part of it was kind of wanting to narrow down, let's look at the top 1% or the top 5% of these builds. And then it's just kind of making sure, the key thing I think last time is that we wanted to make sure that we're including all of the contests and sort of averaging out the top lineups per contest. So we looked a bit at that, but mostly I just sort of wanted Elijah to pull in some different ways of looking at the data. Let's see some visualizations, and then let's just see what you have, Elijah, and we can kind of we can just chat about it and see where we want to go from here.
Yeah, sounds good. Sounds good to me. I'll just share my screen quickly. You guys see this?
There it is.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay, sweet. So yeah, as Matt was kind of saying before, we made a few updates. Mostly we're dealing with the data. So at a high level, we have new data now. It's just easier to download. We also fixed an issue that we spoke about a while ago, where our sim precision being equal to 0 was causing weird behavior, but it seemed like the new data wasn't having that. And something Matt and I spoke about earlier was Matt added some logic to the code that simmed a contest a few times, I think, given in certain scenarios, and we were originally treating those as independent performances.
Just to clarify that, what we're doing is running multiple builds, more builds the higher the variance or the sim precision setting is. So at 1 or at 0 through 5, we would only run one build, and then at 6 through 8 we would run 2, and I think 9, 10, something like that, we would run 3. And one thing I realized that we chatted about is that I think the way that you're looking at the data, we were kind of treating those builds independently, and so that doesn't really take care of the variance issue, and it almost adds more. Whereas what we should the point of doing that is we sort of aggregate those builds together, because the higher the sim precision setting, the more variance there's going to be in just the lineups that are created. So just to clarify that, it's basically because we had, I think, 2,200 builds per slate, but there's only 1,100 different combinations of the 3 slider settings. So that extra, basically we're doing double the builds that we need to, I guess, to take care of that variance issue.
Yeah.
And before it almost would have been biased more towards higher sim precision without doing this, right? Like
Probably.
they got like higher sim precision builds would have had basically like more chances to be the best scoring setting because we weren't averaging them together.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, because if one does very well with low sim precision, then like that will eat up all of the like
exactly.
top X%. So like we thought so group them together. So like I noticed right when I did this, the size of my data reduced dramatically because I was now grouping together like 3, but like the quality of the data is such that like I think that the patterns make more sense now. So that was definitely a great catch, Matt. I think it helped.
Cool.
So just to sort of say what Matt was saying again, like we're now looking at the top 1%, 5%, and the top build, including each contest, which is something that we were not doing before. And this also should reduce some of the noise in that if for a given slate, we performed just the sims were very accurate, and some of our builds will do extremely well. Like in the previous analysis, that would be taking a lot of the credit for the build settings, whereas this should hopefully reduce that effect, which is, I think, what we were seeing. So I'll just go through this quickly. For the sake of this analysis, we only wanted to look at the flagship contest just because there were so many different slates to look at. And buckets to look at. We thought this would be a good just starting point for like this meeting. But that being said, like I've run this for all of them. This is just zooming in on the bucket 23, which are GPPs of at least I think it's 10 to 50,000 entrants and 150 maxes. So much you've run from last time, Jordan, but like these numbers, at least the correlation column was a lot more scattered. There was a lot more noise last time, whereas we're now seeing a much more steady increase as the slate size gets larger. So I think that like those adjustments we made were definitely pretty informative.
Yeah, I mean, this makes at least like a little bit more intuitive sense, I think, right off the bat. I mean, interesting. I think 2 things just jump out pretty immediately interesting to me. One, ownership still kind of static. That was basically what we were seeing last time too. And I would say for a contest of this size and payout structure, that's a lower sim precision at basically all slate sizes than I would have initially expected. But that's kind of just first reactions here.
Yeah, and when Elijah was showing me a little bit of this data earlier, and I'm sure you're going to get to it, Elijah, but like one thing I wanted to figure out was with the ownership, it's so static at 5, but does that mean that 5 is the best ownership setting, or does that just mean it's completely random and 5 is just the average of a bunch of zeros and a bunch of 10s and a bunch of everything, right? Because that is, 5 is the average across all the builds. So
that's
ahead,
what this
Elijah,
visual that's what this visual is trying to unpack. So just to reiterate kind of went into these ownership numbers. So it's we took the top 5% of builds in every contest that was in each slate size and then average those to a single value. So what I did here was to look at, okay, what numbers actually went into that average value? Like what was the distribution of the top 5% builds ownership settings? And looking at this, like as Matt was saying, it's not like they're clustered around 5. It looks like they're pretty much evenly spread out across values 0 to 9, with like there being a strange spike at 10. But so that being said, like in terms of this analysis, it looks like the ownership fade setting is not having a big effect on the expected ROI, which is interesting.
Except for at 10.
Except for at 10, exactly. So, which is like, I don't know, that's peculiar to me.
It feels kind of like a red flag again there, right? I mean, there's something going on ownership 10 builds, maybe.
Oh, so just to be clear, this is also only for all the flagship contests where the slate size was at least 7. That doesn't like answer the question, but just I'm going to keep in mind of the context of this.
Because you go, it looks like you might have the top, because one thing is like top 5% is still a decent number of builds. So I'm just curious when we get to.
So I can get
let's get back to the mega ratio after.
Okay, so let's go back. So this is now the top 1%.
Right.
So this is now looking at in every single contest what was the top 1% of builds, and then average those per slate size. And so this is, sort of just the breakdown of all of these settings. You could see like correlation got a lot smaller in the smaller slates. It went from like, when we were looking at 5%, it was like 1.2 in the 3-size slate, whereas now it's 0.21. So I guess like just really limiting yourself the top 1%, it seemed to have dropped down the aggregated average correlation. So
Yeah, real
everything
quick
came
though,
down.
I mean, one thing that
Oh,
I'm
sorry.
just
Yeah.
thinking of here is, well, just kind of look at like if there's 1,100 different combinations of build settings, then top 5%, like each top 5% is basically saying the top 50 combinations of sliders, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Is that for each contest? And so like there's only like say the optimal is like 000,
Sure.
you know, which it probably isn't, but like say the optimal 000, then it's like there's only I mean I guess there's still there's like 10 different combinations of like 0 correlation and 0 precision. Like say the optimal is 000,
Yeah.
and it's perfectly, and that, but like correlation is the most important, and then precision is the second most important, and ownership is the third most important. And so it's like the top 10 ROI are going to be 0 correlation, 0 precision, and then just like 0 through 10 ownership.
Sure.
And then the next 10 are going to be like 0 correlation, 1 precision, top 10 of ownership.
Yeah.
Like obviously that's not, I'm sure that's not exactly what's happening, but like when we're looking at top 5%, there's only so many combinations of build settings, so like we're kind of leaking in the worst. Like if correlation and precision are like way more important than ownership, then because there's only so many combinations of those settings, I think I don't know if I'm being clear, but I can kind of understand why ownership is maybe way higher, and so I think it would be interesting to see like the top builds for each contest, because like just it seems to like me like maybe ownership is just like not nearly as impactful as the other two.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense to me. I guess I didn't think about how limiting the X% like limits the combinations that are possible. I never really thought about that. But so I did do that. I looked at the top build per contest, and honestly, like there was just so much noise I found looking at the top build per contest that like these values seem really odd to me. Because this is again for a flagship contest, even for a 3-game slate, we're seeing like 0 correlation being the best, with 10 ownership and 0%. That just seemed odd to me. So I hear what you're saying, and that like looking at the top build should eliminate that problem.
But this is, I mean, to me, this is almost confirmation. So what I think is happening, it's possible it's like a weird bug.
Yeah.
My theory here is basically just like in a 3-game slate, there's only so much edge to go around. Like it's hard, basically it's really hard to find edge in a 3-game slate. And so like the more you have, higher you have precision, the more randomness you're adding, and the less edge. If we think that there's edge from the projections, from the sim itself, then like maximizing that edge is going 0 precision and 0 correlation. But I mean, the ownership thing is weird. Because then we're not maximizing that edge necessarily. But if it's like, I mean, the edge is like, I don't know, it's like maybe just 10 ownership and 0 precision is sort of like the best combination of like game theory and our projections. And like the more you add precision, just like the like farther you get from that like maximizing that edge. I don't know. so like it's super weird, but I can kind of explain a story, like tell a story that sort of explains it. But
Yeah, this is
yeah,
by ROI too, so it like makes sense that it's like really aggressive, like chasing ROI at all cost to me.
Yeah. I did this for
right.
Omega, and I saw very similar.
Interesting.
Yeah, which
Yeah,
is also interesting.
yeah. So we can, yeah, I did the same for Omega for the top 1% and the top build per contest. And what I saw
Yeah,
was like
and omega
very
ratio
similar.
is right, and omega ratio is like basically maximizing portfolio. It's like portfolio optimization. So it's like the sum of all winning sims divided by the negative sum of all losing sims.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a way of like minimizing risk. But actually, I didn't mention this to you before, but I would be kind of interested in seeing the median ROI as well.
Mhm. Okay.
Well, the median, yeah, no, I don't know if median really makes a lot of sense, because that's
Yeah.
just like not really what we care about. But
The other thing I'm thinking here too is since we're doing this based on the entire lineup pool,
Mhm.
I think it might like artificially be bringing the sim precision down because the like full
yeah,
pool of 500 lineups is going to be way more diverse than your
Yes,
150 subset.
for sure.
yeah, yeah, I think that's right. And it makes me, yeah, I guess it makes me question like the goal, like if the goal of this from the beginning was like let's maximize ROI of the entire lineup pool. I think that like I'm feeling like the sim bias issue is impacting things more than we thought that it would,
Yeah.
because like we're evaluating these builds based on our own sims, and so it's just like on the one hand, yeah, like having a 10 sim precision means you're getting like the optimal from like the optimal lineup from given set of sims in every lineup, but it's like that's minimizing like the kind of projection, like the not the sim bias, but the like model bias. So if we're
Yeah.
like we're if we're like way under on Otani as a pitcher, say, then the field in terms of like we have him at like 1 or 1.5 strikeouts below hit prop, or like what Vegas think, or what other projections sources think, whatever, then like I think I kind of mentioned this in our last call as well, but like zero sim precision is going to like maximize that edge of fading Otani.
Mhm.
And it makes sense to me that like if he's on a 3-game slate, then we're saying like this is how the Sims are saying you win this slate by completely fading Otani, because we think that the field is way higher on
Right.
him
Yeah.
than they should be. And so like that is the way that you maximize it's like the exploitative style play, right? Like you're exploiting this perceived flaw in
Mhm.
the field, which is like say being high on Otani, and like the way that you exploit that the most is by having 0% precision. But if we had sims that were like perfectly, say we didn't have any sort of like mean bias, it's like the mean projections are exactly what like the field it thinks,
Mhm.
then I would expect that we'd see much higher sim precision scores here, because like we're saying that then there's going to be more edge from lineup construction than mean projections, right? Does that like both? I guess both of you. Do you think that logic is kind of makes sense?
It does to me. I like just kind of starting to think about it. I don't know, like even with a field average mean projection, I don't know why this method of doing this would ever, like, why would you ever get a high sim precision out of a build? Like, why?
I think because of lineup construction, because I think the idea is that like if you do set 10 sim precision, or like the higher sim precision, you're getting kind of like better like game script. It's like for a showdown, as an example, you want all of your lineups to be like game scripts, right?
Right.
Like for NFL Showdown, you want it to be like, okay, this is something that could happen in a game. And if you had 0 sim precision, you're not going to get that. And if you have 10, you are. And so, like in theory, that's the value that I think a high sim precision would add, even with the like projection bias, because like you're getting lineups that like make sense with like game scripts. But for MLB, I think you don't need that. Even on a small slate, it seems like you don't need that. Which is surprising. I mean, I've always felt like on a small slate, you really want those game scripts, but I don't know. I mean,
yeah.
So like, I think if that is the case, kind of my theory, I mean, part of the issue is like, we do think that there is an edge with our projections, right? But we also don't believe that our projections are 100% perfect. And it makes sense. It feels like the answer should be somewhere in the middle, where we want our default sliders to account for the fact that, like, yeah, we have edge, like our projections are good or better than the fields. But like they're not perfect, and so we want probably like to incorporate that like lineup construction edge more than this is doing.
So, okay. So in my head, the way I'm kind of thinking about this is like, ultimately, as the sim precision gets higher, we kind of include outcomes that are further and further away from the mean. And since we're testing this against what deliver the highest ROI results, I feel like it's always going to end up being shifted towards low sim precision, where we just had that big projection edge.
Yeah.
Like, we're never, the higher sim precision builds are almost just hedges that will never actually be the best.
Yeah.
I wonder if, like, I feel like the value of a higher sim precision day to day is almost more to like not bust out or over the course of the season. Like, if you just, exactly. Yeah. And I wonder if there's a way to do this in a way that actually mimics a bankroll a little more. Like the actual true risk of, if you built on like a really low sim precision over and over, how long could you actually go and sustain that while you, I guess, kind of almost waited for the slate where you did have that huge projection edge to deliver all the ROI.
Yeah.
That's an interesting way to do this.
In theory, you'd think that omega ratio would address that a bit, but it seems like here it's not. I think part of the reason that it's not is that, like, because we have this, like, we're evaluating based on the sims, like omega ratio, the idea is that like the numerator is the slates that how much you win when you win, and the denominator is how much you lose when you lose. But if you're like not, if the sims are saying like, oh, like this barely ever loses, like this 500 lineup set never loses, then
I don't think it'll encapsulate.
And like the problem is that, right, and like with omega ratio, it's evaluating the entire lineup pool, but you're never gonna, well, rarely, I guess you can if you can enter enough unique, enough entries, but like the goal isn't that you're entering the entire lineup pool. And so evaluating the portfolio of lineups doesn't really make sense when we're like sorry, I lost my train of thought, but when we're not entering the portfolio of lines, we don't want to
Yeah.
evaluate it that way.
For sure.
I think Jordan, you're right that like even though we want to maximize ROI, it does feel like there's some like minimum amount of diversification that we need here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even these
Like,
correlation numbers. Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Well, I guess I'm almost tempted to, just out of curiosity, almost like look at what these like eliminate like 0 through 5 precision or 0 through 4
Yeah.
precision and just see what the results look like with like only looking at higher sim precision. Just like, not that that's like what we should do, but I kind of want to see like, okay, assuming like we have pools that are more diverse, what are the optimal settings then?
Yeah.
But the other thing I'm thinking is to like figure out a way, and this is like I think a bigger project, but we've talked about it a bit as a team a while back, but figure out a way in the evaluation step of these sims to remove some of the projection bias and
Yeah.
like almost adjust the sims to be closer to the field. So if we could like essentially like take the aggregate projections from like from a few other sources, or like essentially like adjust all of the distributions, all the sims to be closer to what the field would use and use those to evaluate. See how that changes things. I think originally we didn't think that was necessary because we're sort of looking at like relative ROI. But again, like I think it makes sense that like these sims are just saying like, look, the source of the most edge is the like essentially the model like the difference in the like average projections versus the field, and that kind of makes sense if we have like it makes sense if we have the sims are assuming that they're perfect, and if the sims are like sufficiently different than the field too, which I think our sims are like our MLB sims aren't going to be that far from the field, but like they might be far enough that there's like that's the edge that the sims are telling us
for
to
sure.
maximize.
Yeah, I think like hard coding the precision values is like a good, quick, and dirty way to maybe get rid of some of that bias. But I agree. I think it'd be really interesting to take our sims and then after the sim adjust the player projections based on the field. I think that could be really interesting.
Yeah, my gut, I feel like still says that if we say eliminate 0 through 5 sim precision, that the most like we'll just see that like 6 becomes really popular. I don't know exactly what this would look like. I feel like that a really interesting way of doing this, and maybe it is in a future project, would be to actually like make whatever we're doing here play with a real bankroll, like a simulated bankroll over a season, and create some kind of chronological thing. Because I wonder like how many of these players playing on like anywhere from 1 to 5 correlation, roughly 5 ownership, and 1 to 5 precision, like how many of those theoretical players could survive a baseball season?
Yeah, probably not. Yeah.
And then I think you have an interesting like, because it's kind of honestly it's a similar path that we took on the contest selection project that we did with Eric, where like we came to one strategy that's like, okay, you've maximized ROI. This is like your theoretical edge, but can you do it? Can you actually survive? And the answers to those were super different. Like there's
Right.
definitely an ROI boost in those single entries and 3 maxes. Like that's where we went first. But then when we simmed out in order of how it actually feels to play it, you go broke too easily to actually ever get there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the reason we didn't do that here is because, like, I think our thinking was that the slider settings, the point of slider settings is to maximize your pool ROI. The point of saber score, or the point of a future diversifier, like basically the point of like, okay, after your pool's built, then like it within the build setting exposures, that's like where you diversify. But if the pool isn't diversified enough to begin with, then you can't do that. Like if the pool has 100% of some stack, then you're not ever going to be able to like diversify it. Which is why we had a mega ratio as like a tiebreaker, but it feels like maybe that's not enough here.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird. I don't know. As kind of almost a counterpoint, I like just ran one. So tonight's a 9-game slate. So I ran one at 252, which was I think maybe the top 1% for ROI or the top 5% ROI. And across your entire pool, like you're not overly exposed to any one player. Like highest batting exposure in a 500 build is 30%. Highest overall player exposure is Verlander, 50%. And it's kind of a weird slate tonight where you have that one pitcher that's projected way above everybody else. And so you're actually getting a pretty diversified pool here, even at Sim Precision 2, mostly just because we're looking at that entire set of 500. I don't know. It's interesting, but there's almost no stacks because the correlation's so low.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is interesting. One thing I just kind of thought of, this is like maybe on the bug territory, or I'm not sure what we set min salary at for these builds. Which I'm just kind of wondering if like part of it is if we have min salary at 0, then we like lower sim precision would, or like high sim precision might give you some like weird lineups. I think it looks like we did set min salary at 0. I think the reasoning was like we don't want to like let that impact the results, but that is different than what we have in the app. But just like, I mean, I just ran a build, for tonight again with those settings that you mentioned, but then 0 min salary, and I mean, we get some very low salary lineups, which I think is because the ownership, like the combination of high-ish ownership and low-ish precision is like ownership is pretty highly weighted. Yeah, there's like a lot of quite low salary lineups. And I'm feeling like that was maybe what we should have done, is set min salary to what it is in the app. And like, even if that should be changed, like that's not what we're testing here.
Yeah.
Because I think the fact that we had mid salary so high, ownership fade is like not doing as much as it would,
Mhm.
or sorry, mid salary, because mid salary is at 0 in the builds. I got mixed up. Mid salary is at 0 in the builds, and so yeah, I don't know. This is kind of weird. Sorry, let me just okay, I need to wrap my head around this a little bit.
Yeah.
No, I mean it would make sense to me if min salary is 0, that it then also kind of favors lower precision as well, and it almost it neutralizes the ownership fade slider a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, kind of like getting to next steps here.
Yeah.
I think that I guess, is there more that you wanted to show, Elijah, to in this like presentation to go over, or we kind of got through all of it?
I don't think so. I think
Okay.
I think we got through what I wanted to show. Yeah.
Yeah. I think the results, like, they definitely are seeming more logical in terms of like correlation. But yeah, the
Mhm.
sim precision thing is something I think we need to like think about. And then the mid salary thing as well.
Yeah.
I would really like to. So the things that I like to just kind of summarize what we talked about and like what the next steps are. I think I want to think of a different way to measure or like have some minimum amount of diversification. But like I guess like you said, Jordan, like there is a decent amount of diversification in
Mm-hmm.
like even with a low sim precision. But like I still want to look into that a bit. And I want to look at what we can do to eliminate or to mitigate the like bias, the model bias.
Mhm.
Will from our team had some ideas a while back about how to like adjust sims in like a smarter way for custom projections, so I might look at that again. And I think that we should probably run it with like the min salary numbers that are in the app.
Yeah.
And then once we've done that, like then maybe we can like run it again, like with the purpose of changing min salary. But then I guess that maybe changes. It's kind of a chicken and the egg thing, right? Like
Mhm.
they all impact each other a bit.
Yeah, the min salary thing kind of drives me nuts too, because it I know this is kind of idealist, but you really shouldn't need it. Like,
Yeah.
I feel like
Agreed.
yeah, I don't know. It's kind of, it feels arbitrary a little bit, where it's just like it's this, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think
thing
the
that
idea
makes
with
it
like
work.
ownership, it's like really about the ownership fade, or like a lot of it's about ownership fade. If you're like boosting a bunch of players,
Right.
sort of like ownership fade, it's also a little bit arbitrary in that like it's not sim. I mean, we base it on their standard deviations and like we do it in a smart way, but it's still like we're like increasing or decreasing like the projections of the players based on their ownership. That has nothing to do with like their like the sims, and so like
Mm-hmm.
you could, if you do that too much, you're gonna like end up with bad lineups. And so like the min salary I think is a way to sort of like quality control that. But
Yeah. The one other thing that
honestly,
popped
like,
into my head,
go ahead, Jordan. Yeah.
I was just gonna say, like, kind of thinking through this, I feel like it's easy to explain how correlation and ownership fade like deliver ROI, like what they do. I think it's harder with sim precision. I think the advantage of sim precision, like we've been talking about, isn't so much that it like adds EV to your lineups. It's a diversification tool. I wonder what kind of results we would get if we just held sim precision constant and then to a value that we think is like intuitively correct, and then see what correlation and ownership fade do.
Yeah.
Because it would also reduce the number of things that are moving, and it might, I don't know, we might see some patterns a little bit easier.
Yeah, that's easy. Like from my end, that's like we don't have to rerun anything. I could just hold it constant, right, Matt? Like I don't think that's something I have to.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's a really good idea. I think hold sim precision at like 7,
Okay.
6 or 7, something like that. I think 7 is like a good one to like get a lot of like diversification.
Mhm.
And then like see like basically do the analysis with just the builds at 7. The other thing I do want to look at is like you had you've taken the top build from every contest and averaged them out, right? But I would like to just see like even just a spreadsheet of like contest and build settings of like here are all of like the builds that went into that average, just to see like I know with like the 0 10 0 it looked like it was just like a handful of builds, but for some of the other ones that had a bigger sample size, like if there's like 10 to 20 builds, like I want to see what, not just the individual like ownership number, but like all 3 of them together, because they do interact, right? Like the lower sim precision is, I think the higher the impact of ownership fade and correlation, and so like that does matter.
For sure. I can get that
Interaction
over to
between
you.
them. So yeah, I think let's look
I
at
was like
that.
printing that. Yeah, anyways, just for like my sanity to make sure the averages like made sense. So that's like something that's simple.
Yeah, let's look at that. Let's hold sim precision constant, and then I am going to look into the adjusting the sims based on like the field. I'm also just gonna like, this is making me want to just do a little bit of my own digging into the builder and just I kind of want to test some things out, to be honest, which I think you could also do a bit, Elijah, but like I want to run some of these settings that are optimal like Jordan did, and like just see what the builder creates, or even like look at the lineups, the actual lineups that are like going into this sim. Like we have the build IDs, right? We can like in theory we could pull up the lineups. I mean, it's going to require a little bit of data wrangling, but like we could pull up the lineups themselves and like look at them and see like we could even see potentially like what is the highest ROI lineup that like this build is like from within this build for the specific contest, like kind of dig in and just see like I want to see what is leading, like the reason for some of these results, I guess. Because like when we're doing these contest sims and like testing the builds, it's like there's a lineup, right, that is like the top ROI. There's like a theoretical in the sims top ROI lineup. And so like really the builds that are going to grade out the best are going to like be the ones that like have the most of that, like close to that lineup. And so I just kind of want to see what that looks like a bit. So like that, let me think about what you could do there, Elijah, because I do think that like that might be something that you could like dig into and like start digging into some of those lineups and like just see what the trends are.
That could be
and
cool.
maybe you can actually see some of like the min salary trends too, because I do want to look at like on like these different build settings, like what is the range of lineup salaries that we're getting. So yeah, I think that would be good to look into as well.
That sounds interesting.
Yeah, I was hoping that we would have some like actual slider changes. I'm feeling like we probably are not at the point of like making changes in the app right now, based on this. It seems like there's more questions, like more unknowns than we like. I think holding sim position constant, like I think we might see some interesting results there. And like since sim position is for most of these defaults is like around 7. Like I think if we just say like, okay, like let's not change sim precision, but maybe we can change correlation even before we finish this analysis,
And there was even a note on that last episode or the episode before, Matt. I think you said that like maybe we're heading towards a path where sim precision is actually a little bit more of a user preference kind of thing rather than something that's optimally set for ROI. So, and it would be very easy to like qualify that and say like, hey, like you're going to take on more risk, but you like theoretically are going to have more upside when you're right at the lower your sim precision is.
Yeah,
that makes sense. And just maybe not something good test. Like that makes sense. Yeah, which I don't think. I didn't realize that.
Okay. Yeah, I think we've got like plenty to work with this week. Do you guys have any other like thoughts on other things to discuss or next steps?
I don't think so. Anything for me. I think I'm excited to see what happens next. I mean, I think with how important the sliders are, it 100% makes sense for us to be like very confident in what we're finding. And I don't feel like we're totally there yet. So I think it makes sense to like keep grinding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. I think holding the sim precision constant was a good idea. I think I'm hopeful that will like yield some pretty interesting results.
Yeah, for sure.
I also think, and I think there's a possibility too that like we end up re-challenging some of our assumptions about like baseball DFS here a little bit too. I would not be. I don't know. That's the hard part is like when we're doing any of this stuff is this doesn't meet our intuition. Well, how right is your intuition about this kind of stuff? And then it gets kind of hard. So
for sure.
Yeah.
That's hopefully I could bring a new perspective. That's kind of why Andy wanted to rope me into this. He was like, he doesn't have to do background DFS, just like see what's optimal and try and challenge what those initial assumptions may have been. So I get that. It's a little weird. But yeah.
Yeah. Great. Okay.
All right. Awesome. Well, thanks, guys.
Sounds good. Yeah. Talk to you guys later.
Bye, guys.